Welcome to the Point. The election last month brought big changes to Lansing. Last week, we introduced you to the new Speaker of the House, Joe Tate, a Democrat from Detroit. It marks the first time Democrats have been in control in the House in 12 years. The minority leader is Republican Matt Hall, who serves part of Calhoun and Kalamazoo counties, and he talks about how he and fellow Republicans will approach their new role beginning next year. Representative, let's start with a look backwards, because obviously every election cycle holds its own surprises and the outcomes have consequences. I know you were optimistic, as were your colleagues over on the Senate, that when all was said and done, Republicans could prevail, and by narrow margins in both chambers, they did not. So that changes the atmosphere a lot for you and your colleagues. How do you put that in perspective as you talk to your caucus?
Well, I think the first thing I tell them is this. In our situation, the top of the ticket, Tudor Dixon, performed very poorly. She lost by double digits. But if you look, we lost our majority by just a few hundred votes. Every single one of our House Republican candidates overperformed significantly, and most of the time were the top vote getter in their districts. So what I take away from that is that the people of Michigan like the work that the House Republicans have done. And it's been balanced. It's been, a lot of the things Governor Whitmer ran on were only possible because House Republicans worked together to work some of these things out. So you got more balanced public policy. I mean, when she said, we ran and didn't raise taxes, we did all these things and didn't raise taxes, well, that was because House Republicans were at the table. You're not gonna have that now. But I think that the House Republicans look at this and say, we've had a very solid record the last 12 years in majority. That's why we overperformed versus any other Republican candidates running. And so if we stay true to our principles of, having a quality government that's affordable, working to bring jobs to our communities and supporting public safety, then the people will put us back in majority in 2 years.
When you look at what changes, and again, I point out that the margins are narrow, but the impact is still the same when you'll have a Democratic Speaker of the House, a Democratic Senate Majority Leader. And that means that they control the agenda, unlike Republicans who have been controlling the agenda, as you point out, for the last 12 years, and in the Senate for much longer than that. How does that change the way you and your caucus approach what you're going to do on a daily basis?
I would say because of the quality candidates that we ran across the state, people like Nancy DeBoer and Holland that were in tough races but performed very well, we're in a situation where the Democrats have 56 and the Republicans have 54. That means they cannot lose one vote. If they lose one vote, they can't govern. And so that puts us in a very strong position as the Republicans. And so we're going to be focused on how do we make life more affordable for people? How do we make sure that there's value from government? How do we make sure we promote public safety and have stronger and safer communities? And how do we bring more jobs and careers of the future to West Michigan and across the state? We're going to be focused on those things, and where we can work with the Democrats and the governor, we'll be there to do those things. But if they start getting into some of their more extreme views, then we're not going to be able to work with them, and we're going to do everything we can to stand up for the people of Michigan who want us to be focused on making life more affordable for them and bringing jobs to our community and having safe communities.
When you talk about making life more affordable, one of the areas that is always a point of contention between Republicans and Democrats is the budget. Mm-hmm. The Democrats will be leading the budget process, but it is likely, because of their narrow margins, as you point out, they're going to need some Republican support in there. So what are the biggest differences, or what do you suspect some of the biggest differences may be when it comes to the budget process? Because obviously they are going to be working very closely with the governor and with her priorities, whereas Republicans in the past have not always gone along with everything that Governor Whitmer has wanted in the budget.
Yeah, well, one thing I would say is generally when we look at how to spend the surplus that's there from federal funds, we still have a few $1 billion there from the federal government that they gave out during the pandemic. And some of the differences there are, should we use that money to pay down debt and to put in our rainy day fund and to make sure we're stabilizing state government. We're taking care of our obligations so that cities and municipalities don't go bankrupt in a few years. Are we saving for a potential downturn in the economy? And also, are we spending the dollars on investing in one-time opportunities that might be transformational to communities, whether that's, improving the river in Grand Rapids or Battle Creek, creating green space, creating an amphitheater, looking at major infrastructure investments like we are doing over in Coopersville to grow agribusiness there. These are one-time investments. What Democrats have tended to want to do is create more government programs. And what that will do is that'll eventually lead to tax increases in the future. So if you do one-time projects and you pay down debt like we've tried to do, you can sustain that budget because it's one time. If you do what they want to do, which is grow government programs, the taxpayers are eventually going to have to foot the bill for that, and we're going to see major tax increases, which will hurt people's pocketbooks.
Let's talk a little bit about that surplus, because there's been much made of that. And there have been some calls for some of that money to go back to taxpayers at a time when inflationary pressures continue to hit home budgets in a really dramatic way, particularly noticeable as you move through the holidays. Is there any chance that the makeup of the current legislature and this governor could do something like that before the end of the session?
Well, I chair the tax committee, and so I've put down a couple proposals for the governor over the last few years. Those would have given tax relief to every Michigan family, worker, and senior, would have lowered the income tax, and would have had broad tax cuts that everybody could benefit from. The governor did not sign off on that. The governor wants more targeted tax cuts, which are generally targeted toward her political supporters. So I'm open to any kind of deal with her that will provide broad relief for all Michiganders, so every Michigan family, worker, and senior can feel that relief, not just people with public pensions, not just people that have certain incomes. I think everybody needs that relief right now, and if we can come to that kind of a deal over the next few weeks, I'm all in.
When you think about where you are, you've mentioned a couple of times having safe communities, and we know, particularly in particular areas, automobile thefts and in some cases violent crime, we have seen increases there at a time when some, not all, some have advocated for less funding for police. The net result has been that at the state level, you have continued to fund public safety. Is that something, I know it's a priority for you, but is it something you're concerned about as you move into this new phase of the legislature?
Absolutely. I represent much of the Kalamazoo County, and recently Kalamazoo City was rated one of the most dangerous cities in the country for violent crime. You look at their city council, their solution is to decriminalize public indecency laws. So, we've got a lot of problems through communities, and what some of these Democrats want to do is they want to defund police. They want to put all kinds of new requirements and restrictions on police. And I think now is one of the most difficult times to find people that want to do police work. And so we need to be working with them to make it easier to enter the profession and to make them feel supported so we can have more officers on the streets. That's really what we need, and it's a tough time recruiting them.
When you think about what's going to happen starting in January, do Republicans put forward their own set of agenda items and their own priorities, understanding that those are not necessarily going to be picked up or adopted by Democrats, but will you continue to promote those things that you've talked about previously?
Yes, I've appointed a team of our caucus members to develop what that platform looks like, to get ideas from all of our Republican legislators and to identify what are those things that we're willing to fight for this term and what would we do if people put us back in 2 years. So I need the buy-in of our entire Republican team, but you'll see that, and it'll be centered around creating jobs of the future in our communities. It'll be centered around making life more affordable for people, and it'll be centered around public safety and safe communities.
You were talking about jobs of the future, and let's go back to that for a little bit. What do you do, what can you do to help create those jobs in the future? Because government can only do so much, because the private sector will direct where those jobs of the future are going to be. But what do you think that the government can do, state of Michigan can do to promote that?
Yeah, so my number one priority is to make our state more competitive. And I think we've done a good job in West Michigan, but when I talk to people that are employers in our region, the number one issue is talent. How do we develop more talent? And that starts with education. It goes to some of the work we've already done to make affordable scholarships for people to go to community college to learn either a skilled trade or some other type of associate's degree profession that they can get higher paying careers. But it's also, we need to reduce those barriers to employment. We need to find out what they are and help employers reduce them. That's childcare costs. It could be transportation. There are a lot of factors, but I want to be laser focused working on that. And then one of the second things that I've heard as a barrier is affordable workforce housing. You look at some of our communities and people can't afford to buy a home there. And so we want to advocate policies that are going to make housing more affordable for people so they can live in these communities. Then, the third thing is making sure we have a fair tax and regulatory environment. And if the Democrats try to make those less competitive, to make it harder to create jobs, then I'm going to fight them on that. Where they're willing to partner on developing talent and developing affordable workforce housing, I'm going to work with them. And we're always willing, as you've seen, to work with the governor and to help land large employers or to make infrastructure investments that will allow major economic growth in some of our communities.
On the subject of affordable housing, we talked with Representative Hall about what, if anything, state government can do to help with that. What he had to say when we return to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. When the Michigan legislature reconvenes in January, Democrats will have majorities in both the Senate and the House. Majorities, but only by a slim margin. So navigating legislation will mean either keeping all caucus members on the same page or working across the aisle with Republicans. In the House, one of the Republicans they'll need to work with is the new leader, Representative Matt Hall. We continue our story picking up where we left off, talking about affordable housing. I can't tell you how many years I've heard people in your position talk about affordable housing here in the state capitol. And I understand that there are a lot of factors to that, but if you look at the circumstance right now, supply has not increased greatly. It was under a lot more pressure a year ago, but there's still not a great deal more supply. But interest rates have increased significantly and, according to some economists, are likely to continue to increase or at least not decrease anytime in the short term. How much more difficult does that make it when you try to find affordable housing?
Yeah, the interest rates are going to be an issue, and you look at a lot of these things, these cost of living increases are an issue, and a lot of that has been caused by some of the things that the Biden administration has done. And so my hope is that Governor Whitmer doesn't embrace those same type of policies with a majority in the House and Senate, but instead works with the Republicans to advance more bipartisan solutions on affordable housing, on creating jobs, and helping develop talent in our state.
One of the things that Democrats have expressed an interest in on both ends of this Capitol building and from the governor's office is getting rid of the right to work laws here in the state of Michigan that were enacted a number of years ago by Republicans when Republicans held the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. What's your take on that if that's one of their first attempts?
So my hope is that the Democrats will focus on bipartisan solutions that make the state more competitive, like I'm focused on and the House Republicans are focused on. How do we create jobs? How do we cut taxes? How do we make life more affordable? If instead they start going down the road of making Michigan a less job-friendly state, then they're going to be dividing people from the beginning. If they start going after right to work, which is something that has been one of the top things that has made our state more competitive for creating jobs, then you're going to see a lot more difficult time finding common ground with the Republicans, because we're looking at how to make this state more competitive, not how to make it less competitive like this policy would do.
Speaking specifically of right to work, but in general, you've seen it from the majority side, and you know how tough it is to keep a caucus together. If you take an issue like right to work, which can be very polarizing, in that caucus of 56, you accurately pointed out earlier, Democrats can only afford to lose one vote. How tough is it going to be on some of those issues like that, if indeed they do come up? How tough is it going to be from your perspective to keep all of those Democrats together? Because, I mean, that's keeping every single vote is something that Republicans certainly weren't able to do on an everyday basis.
Yeah, when I look at the Democrat House caucus, they seem much more divided than the Republicans. They have a lot of very extreme members that want to defund the police and want to advocate a lot of these social warrior issues. So they're going to have a problem getting votes. And if they want to get votes from the Republicans, then they need to work on policies that include making our state more competitive, bringing talent to our area, helping making communities safer and stronger, supporting public safety, and bringing jobs and careers of the future to our region. Where they'll work with us on that, paying off debt, making the state more sustainable from a financial standpoint, building infrastructure where it makes sense, and helping to grow communities and economic development. If they work with us on those things, we're going to have a great 2 years working together and helping the people of Michigan. If they start going down these extreme routes with divisive policies that really hurt the state and make it less competitive, they're going to have a real hard time getting that done, because they're not going to get any Republican votes for those kind of policies.
So we're talking very much about what happens after January, but we still have the whole month of December to take a look at in terms of what goes on around here. Typically, there would be a lame duck session. It has, in the past, been, my words, not yours, kind of a free-for-all in spending when it comes to the end of terms for members who couldn't run again because of term limits, generally speaking. And a lot of times those priorities or special projects for some of those folks are met during that term. But that, generally speaking, only happens when you have a legislature and a governor of the same party. Not the case this time. I said this earlier. I think the legislator to whom I said it disagreed, but I said there isn't much that Republicans want that they can pass in lame duck that the governor will sign, and there isn't much the governor wants that she can't wait until January to get. So what should we expect in terms of session and or legislative activity for the rest of the year?
Well, I think you've heard Governor Whitmer say that she's willing to work with anybody, and she's open to solutions, and I'm the same way. I'm willing to work with Governor Whitmer. I'm willing to work with my Republican colleagues, and if there's some policies we can put forward this year where we can find common ground that benefit the people of Michigan, I'm all for it. And so that's what I'm engaged in that right now. What can we do? What can we find deals on? Whether that's tax reform, whether that's regulatory reform, whether there are opportunities to build infrastructure, to create new economic opportunities, and spur economic growth in regions like West Michigan. I'm all for it, and we're working hard to see if there's things we can do before the end of the year, but we have to have bipartisan support, and that's what we're working on for the rest of the year.
One of the things the governor said to me when I was talking to her about what might be happening in the legislative session was something that we've also heard from the chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party, and they would like for the legislature to move up the presidential primary or give the parties the ability to move that up because it needs legislative approval. That is not the final word on it because it has to be approved by the DNC or, in your case, from the RNC. Is that the kind of thing that you would entertain if there was a lame duck, or when there is going to be a lame duck?
Well, I think that's the kind of thing that we can negotiate on, right? I mean, if that's something they want, and we can work with them on that, but we can find something that, strengthens elections in our state, I'd be open to that. But, it's really got to be a situation where we find something that makes elections stronger in our state, or helps make the state more competitive economically, or would help, with public safety. I mean, it has to, they could do this next year when it's just them, but they're trying to negotiate it now for a reason. And so, it's got to have some things in there that we would want.
There are so many things that happen in this building and in this town that happen quietly. When you have conversations with colleagues across the aisle or with the administration, and necessarily so, because you can't have every conversation, every negotiation in front of my cameras. That's not the way the process works. Do you feel like, and I hear this as you're talking, do you feel like that that's a realistic expectation in the next 30 days or so before the balance of power changes here in the state, to see something of a compromise in any of the areas you just talked about get done? Or are we pretty much in a holding pattern until the Democrats take the majority in January?
I think there's room to get stuff done. And the reason for that is because these incoming Democrat majorities, they've never done this before. They don't really know what they want to do, and they're filled with extremists. And so sometimes it's better working with the ones you know. Governor Whitmer knows the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans, and she knows we're willing to work together with her on things that'll make our state more competitive, create jobs, lower the cost of living, and help public safety. And there may be some things that she might want to do before these Democrats come in that she won't be able to do next year. And I'm totally willing to work with her to make the state better and help people's lives and livelihoods before the end of the year.
I want to finish where we began, and I'm going to ask you for an opinion because you don't know yet. Mm-hmm. But it has been 12 years since Republicans were in the minority, and that was for 2 terms. None of the current members serving experienced that. And so for those of you who are returning, who have never done that, how big of a change is that going to be, and how difficult of an adjustment is that going to be for your returning members, yourself included, to now be in a very different situation than you have been?
Well, it's different because we're used to setting the agenda. We're not going to get to do that anymore. The next speaker, Speaker-elect Tate, who's a Democrat, will get to set the calendar and the agenda. You don't have as many staff people when you're in minority, so we're going through that process as well. But the opportunity that it presents us is an opportunity to really examine who we are and what we stand for, and to really focus on unifying our caucus and our party, and coming back and presenting a positive message to the people of Michigan about why they need Republican leadership in the House in 2 years. And I think that they're going to see that reason when they start seeing what government's like without Republicans at the table. And we're going to fight hard to win it back in 2 years, because we're going to be laser focused on making the state more competitive and building safer communities.
Back with the final thought next, To the Point. The legislature will have a new look next year, and we'll continue to introduce you to the new players every week. To the Point.